They say in Boston, the smart ones keep their heads down and their mouths shut. But what if keeping your mouth shut means watching a 7-year-old boy eat crackers from his jacket pocket because nobody at the table thought to feed him? Hazel Brennan. Lena Pruitt was just a nurse's aide at Mercy General, running on 4 hours of sleep and vending machine coffee when she first noticed the boy. It was a Tuesday in February, the kind of cold that doesn't just chill you but gets inside your joints and stays there. Lena had been working the overnight shift in the pediatric waiting area for 8 months, long enough to know the difference between a kid who was bored and a kid who was scared. This boy was scared. He sat perfectly still in a plastic chair near the window, which no child ever does voluntarily. He was maybe 6 or 7, with dark hair and enormous grey eyes that tracked every person who walked past the automatic doors without moving his head, just his eyes, like a small, exhausted watchman. He was wearing a coat that cost more than Lena's monthly rent, but his sneakers were on the wrong feet. No one was with him. Lena finished charting the intake forms for room 4 and walked over. "Hey there," she said, crouching down so she was at his level. She had learned early on that standing over a scared kid made things worse. "You waiting for somebody?" The boy looked at her. He didn't answer. "Are you hungry?" Lena tried. He gave the smallest possible nod, like he'd been trained to need as little as possible. Lena went to the break room and came back with a granola bar, a cup of apple juice, and a packet of peanut butter crackers. The boy ate all of it with a focused, methodical urgency that broke something open in her chest. She asked his name. He didn't answer. She asked where his parents were. He looked at the floor. She asked if he was okay. He looked out the window, but when she stood to leave, he reached out and touched the sleeve of her scrubs, just briefly, just enough to say, "Don't go yet." So she stayed. She pulled up the plastic chair next to him and sat there until the man who had apparently been on a phone call in the parking garage for 45 minutes finally came inside looking mildly irritated. He was not the boy's father. Lena could tell immediately. He had the energy of someone performing a task he resented, a thick-necked man in an expensive overcoat who barely glanced at the boy before snapping. "Let's go, Matteo. We're late." The boy, Matteo, slid off the chair. He looked back at Lena once before following the man through the automatic doors. That was the first night. It was not the last. Matteo came back the following Tuesday. Same chair, same window, same perfectly still posture, same watchful grey eyes. This time, the thick-necked man, Lena had privately named him Shoulders, sat 3 chairs away playing a game on his phone, occasionally glancing up with the bored hostility of someone babysitting against his will. Lena brought Matteo a cup of hot chocolate from the machine down the hall. She had paid for it herself. It was $1.70 fine she did not technically have to spare. She thought about her brother Danny's physical therapy bills, and the second notice from the landlord folded in her bag, and she brought the hot chocolate anyway. Matteo wrapped both hands around the paper cup. He looked up at her with those storm grey eyes. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. He held it out to her. Lena unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing, a hospital building with a red cross on the door. Outside the door, a stick figure in green, and a small stick figure next to it. The small figure had a speech bubble. Inside the bubble, a tiny sun. She looked up at Matteo. He was watching her with an intensity that seemed too old for his face. "This is us," Lena said softly. He nodded, once. "And that's the sun," Lena said. "Because it's a good place." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the possibility of one. Lena folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into her scrubs pocket. She felt the weight of it there for the rest of her shift. Over the weeks that followed, a ritual developed. Tuesdays and Thursdays, Matteo would arrive with Shoulders, always late evening, always in that expensive coat with the wrong-footed sneakers that no one seemed to fix. Lena would bring something from the break room or the vending machine, or occasionally, on a Friday when she had a little more to work with, a real thing she had packed from home. Clementines once, little containers of applesauce, a thermos of tomato soup that Matteo drank so slowly and carefully you'd think he was memorizing the taste. She never learned why he came to the hospital. He was never a patient. He never went further than the waiting area. When she tried gently to ask Shoulders, the man had looked at her the way you look at a pigeon that's gotten too close to your sandwich and said, "Family business," before returning to his phone. Family business, in the pediatric waiting room of Mercy General, at 9 at night. Lena let it go. She was good at letting things go. She'd had a lot of practice. What she couldn't let go was Matteo. Specifically, the way he sat with the weight of something enormous, and said absolutely nothing about it. It was a Thursday in late March when everything changed. The waiting room was busier than usual. A bad night on the roads, freezing rain had turned the expressway into a parking lot and then a catastrophe, and the ER overflow was bleeding into Lena's area. She was managing 3 check-ins simultaneously when Matteo arrived. Shoulders was worse tonight. She clocked it immediately. He was sweating, despite the cold, his jaw working constantly, his eyes moving around the room with the kind of alertness that didn't look like caution, but like fear. He sat down and pulled out his phone, but his hands were unsteady. Matteo sat in his usual chair and looked at Lena. Lena finished with the family at the desk and crossed to him. "Hey, buddy. Long night?" He looked at Shoulders. Then he looked at her and gave a tiny, barely perceptible shake of his head. "Don't ask about him," Lena frowned. She sat down. "You want some hot chocolate?" He didn't answer. He was looking at Shoulders again. Shoulders was now on his feet, moving toward the automatic doors, his voice dropping low and harsh into the phone. "I said it's handled. Tell him it's handled. I'll call you back." He pushed through the doors and stood outside in the frozen rain, still on the phone. Matteo turned to Lena. Fast, urgent, the most animated she had ever seen him. He reached into his coat and pulled out not 1 drawing but 3, folded together, and pressed them into her hands. He looked at the doors where Shoulders had gone. He looked back at Lena. He pointed at himself, then at her. Then he clasped his hands together. "Stay. Please." Lena felt the hairs on her arms rise. "Matteo," she said carefully, "are you safe?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then in a voice so rough from disuse that it sounded like paper tearing, "The man, he is not supposed to take me. My father didn't." He stopped, swallowed. The effort of speaking was visible on his entire body. "My father doesn't know." Lena went cold. The clinical, professional part of her brain began running through protocols. The human part of her was already moving, already positioning herself between the door and the boy. She didn't look at the drawings yet. She placed her hand over his. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I'm not going anywhere. Do you know your father's number?" Matteo shook his head. But then his eyes went to the inner pocket of his coat and he reached in again and produced a business card. It was heavy crib-colored stock, the kind that meant money. On the front in clean engraved, Caruso holding Caruso, Directora phone number, nothing else. Lena looked at the card. She looked at the boy. She went to the nurse's station, picked up the landline and dialed. It rang twice. The voice that answered was low, precise, and controlled in the specific way of a man who controlled a great many things. "This is Caruso. Mr. Caruso," Lena said. She kept her voice steady. "My name is Lena Pruitt. I'm a nurse's aide at Mercy General Hospital in Boston. I have a little boy here named Matteo who would like me to stay with him, and I think you should come." 3 seconds of silence. "Is he hurt?" "No, sir. I'm on my way." The line clicked dead. Lena went back to Matteo. He had watched her the entire time. When she sat back down, he leaned against her arm, just slightly, the weight of a small bird deciding to land. They were still like that when Shoulders came back through the automatic doors. He took one look at Lena, at the proximity, at the business card she was still holding, and his face went the color of old chalk. "What did you do?" he said. Not a question. Lena looked up at him. "Someone is coming to collect Matteo," she said. "I think you should wait here. You have no idea." He stepped forward. "Sir." Lena stood up slowly. She was 5'4" in her sneakers and weighed 130 pounds soaking wet, but she had worked 3 years in a psychiatric ER, and she knew exactly how to fill a doorway. "This is a children's hospital. There are security cameras on every corner of this room, and there are 4 staff members within shouting distance." Shoulders stopped. Something in his calculations shifted. He sat down. The 4 minutes before Franklin Caruso arrived were the longest of Lena Pruitt's life. She heard him before she saw him, not because he was loud, he wasn't, but because the room changed when he entered, the same way a room changes when the barometric pressure drops before a storm. The air itself seemed to rearrange. Franklin Caruso was not what she expected, which was ridiculous because she hadn't expected anything. There'd been no time. But if she'd built a picture from the card and the voice, she might have imagined someone older, paunchier, louder. The men with power in this city were usually all 3. He was none of those things. He was tall, maybe 6'2", in a dark suit that had clearly started the day perfect and had been somewhat undone by the last 40 minutes. Dark hair, a jaw that looked like it had been set with a right angle, and eyes when they found her the exact same storm gray as Matteo's. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who had learned that moving fast communicated panic, and Franklin Caruso did not communicate panic. He was flanked by 2 men who were clearly not his colleagues. His eyes swept the room and locked on Matteo. Something cracked open in his expression. Just for a moment, just long enough. He crossed the room in 8 steps and crouched in front of his son. He held Matteo's face in both hands. He checked him over with the rapid, methodical attention of a man cataloging damage, and when he found none, he closed eyes briefly and pressed his forehead to Matteo's. Matteo grabbed the lapels of his father's jacket and didn't let go. Franklin Caruso held his son for a long moment. Then he straightened. His eyes found Shoulders across the room, and whatever passed between them in that look made Shoulders shrink 3 inches in his chair. Then he looked at Lena. He looked at her the way she had looked at Matteo's drawing that first night, like he was trying to understand something he hadn't been given the full vocabulary for. "You called me," he said. "Your son asked me to." He glanced at Matteo, who was still gripping his jacket and watching Lena with those huge grey eyes. "He spoke to you." "A few words," Lena said carefully. He was. He needed to. Franklin Caruso's jaw tightened. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a card identical to the one she was still holding. He placed it in her hand anyway, over the one she had. "Your name, Pruitt Lena Pruitt. You work here. Nurse's aide. Pediatric waiting, mostly evenings." He looked at her for another moment, that same cataloguing attention he'd turned on his son. It should have felt invasive. Somehow it didn't. "I owe you something," he said. "You don't owe me anything. He's a sweet kid." Franklin Caruso looked at his son again. Something moved through his face that she didn't have a name for. "Yes," he said quietly. "He is." 2 of his men collected Shoulders, who went without speaking. The 3rd stayed near the door. Matteo pulled on his father's hand. He looked at Lena. Then he pointed at his father. Then he put his palms together again. That same gesture. "Stay." "Please." Franklin Caruso watched his son's hands, his brow furrowed. "He does this. Sign language?" Lena asked. "Not formally. He stopped talking 14 months ago." He said it the way you say a fact you've made peace with but haven't forgiven after his mother. Lena didn't ask. She understood what after his mother meant without the rest of the sentence. Franklin Caruso looked at her scrubs, her name badge, the circles under her eyes that 3 years of overnight shifts had permanently installed. He looked at the way Matteo was still turned toward her, still using her as a reference point the way you use a lighthouse. "I'd like to speak with you privately," he said. "If you have a few minutes." Lena glanced at the clock, at her supervisor's station, at the waiting room that had somehow kept running without her for the last 10 minutes. "I'm on until midnight," she said. "My break is at 10. He nodded. "I'll wait." Franklin Caruso sat in the plastic chair that Shoulders had vacated. He produced his own phone but did not look at it. He sat with Matteo, who had climbed into the chair beside him and fallen asleep within minutes with his cheek on his father's arm. And he watched the room with the same quiet vigilance his son had. Lena watched them both when she thought no one was looking. The break room at Mercy General had 2 folding chairs, a table with a wobbly leg, and a coffee machine that had been threatening to die since October. Franklin Caruso sat in one of the folding chairs and did not seem diminished by it, which Lena found vaguely annoying. "Matteo has been coming here for 3 months, she said. She'd decided on directness. She was too tired for anything else. 9 weeks, he corrected. "Since January 15th, you know. I know he comes here. I didn't know." He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved. "I didn't know he'd found someone." Lena thought about the drawings. She thought about the first night, the crackers from his pocket. Who was that man? Shoulders, the one who brought him. Franklin Caruso's eyes sharpened. "You named him Shoulders in my head." "Sorry." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. "His name is Vic Pellegrino. He's been with my organization for 11 years. "Your organization," Lena said. She made the word neutral. She'd grown up in Charlestown. She was not naive about what certain organizations in Boston looked like. "Caruso Holdings," he said evenly. "We manage real estate, logistics, and several other interests." Pellegrino was supposed to be driving Matteo to his appointments with his therapist on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. "The therapist's office is 2 blocks from here." He paused. "I've since learned he has not been taking Matteo to his appointments for at least 6 weeks. He's been billing for the sessions regardless." Lena felt cold, and bringing him here instead, apparently. His voice was controlled, but there was something burning underneath it. "Matteo never told me. When he doesn't speak, it's difficult to know what he knows and what he's keeping." "He keeps a lot," Lena said quietly. Franklin Caruso looked at her. "What has he told you? Almost nothing in words." "But," she hesitated. She thought of the drawings he'd pressed into her hands tonight. She hadn't looked at them yet. "He gave me something tonight before you arrived. I haven't opened them." She set the folded drawings on the wobbly table between them. Franklin Caruso looked at them but didn't reach out. "Would you like me to?" she started. "Together," he said. "Please." Lena unfolded the drawings carefully. There were 3. The first was a drawing of a car. Not a generic car, a specific one, long and black, with a small figure in the back seat. The back window had an X through it. The second was a drawing of a building Lena didn't recognize, a tall one with lots of windows. On the roof there were 2 small figures, one large figure standing, one small figure, Matteo, sitting. The small figure had X's for eyes. Lena's breath caught. "What building is this?" Franklin Caruso had gone absolutely still. He reached out and picked up the second drawing. His hands, she noticed, were steady. Everything about him was controlled, but his skin had gone white under his tan. "That's the alderman," he said. "My office top floor. And the figure with Matteo." He set the drawing down and picked up the third one. The third drawing was simpler, a man. Tall, like the figure in drawing 2, and on his hand. Matteo had spent the most crayon on this part, pressing hard enough to leave grooves in the paper. A ring, rendered in dark, specific, unmistakable purple. "Does anyone in your organization wear a ring like that?" Lena asked. Franklin Caruso's voice was very quiet. "Raymond Taft, my chief of operations, he has a family ring, amethyst." Lena's hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat on the table. "Matteo saw something," she said. "Didn't he? If Taft has been communicating with the people, who—" He stopped. He put the drawing down very precisely on the table, aligning the edge with the surface, and Lena understood that the precision was the only thing keeping him together. "My wife's accident," he said, "wasn't an accident." The fluorescent light buzzed above them. "Matteo was in the car," Franklin Caruso said. "He was in the back seat when the brakes failed on the Tobin Bridge. The car went through the guardrail. He was thrown clear. She wasn't." He looked at the drawing of the car with the X through the window. "He's been trying to tell me something for 14 months. Lena thought about 7 Tuesdays and 9 Thursdays, about crackers from a jacket pocket, about a little boy who sat in a fluorescent-lit waiting room week after week with the specific patience of someone who was waiting for exactly the right moment. "He found a way," she said softly. Franklin Caruso looked at her. The control in his face had fractured slightly, enough to show what was underneath. "Why you?" he said. It didn't sound like a criticism. It sounded like genuine wonder. "You're a stranger. He doesn't trust easily." Lena thought about the first night, the wrong-footed sneakers, the way he had eaten every cracker. "I think I was the first person who sat with him without wanting anything," she said. "I wasn't his therapist, I wasn't his bodyguard. I was just there." Franklin Caruso was quiet for a long time. "I need to make some calls," he said finally. He was already reaching for his phone, the machinery of whatever he was reassembling itself. "Taft will be taken care of." Lena decided not to ask what that meant, and Pellegrino, she asked instead. A brief, cold pause. "Also taken care of." He stood up. He looked at her in the wobbly-legged break room under the fluorescent light, in her green scrubs with the coffee stain near the pocket, and he said, "Miss Pruitt, what do you need?" It was such an unexpected question that for a moment she didn't understand it. "I beg your pardon. You spent 3 months, 9 weeks, providing care and comfort to my son on your own time and your own money. You intervened tonight without hesitation when he communicated that something was wrong." His eyes were direct and serious. "That is not nothing. What do you need?" Lena thought about her brother Danny, whose knee had been wrecked in a work accident 8 months ago and who was slowly going broke on a PT copay that his insurance covered 40% of. She thought about the second notice from the landlord that was now a third notice. She thought about the coffee machine threatening to die. "I'm fine," she said, which was what she always said. "You're not fine," Franklin Caruso said, not unkindly, "but I'll let it go tonight." He produced a card, a third one, she noticed, and placed it on the table. This one had a handwritten number on the back. "That's my personal cell, not the main line, if you ever need anything, or if Matteo—" He paused. "If you're willing to see him again. On different terms." "What terms?" "Safe ones," he said. He picked up the 3 drawings and folded them back with an exactness that mirrored the way she had unfolded them. "Good night, Miss Pruitt." The calls Franklin Caruso made that night took 45 minutes and restructured several things permanently. Raymond Taft was not at his desk the next morning. His chair was cleared by the end of the week. What exactly happened to Raymond Taft was not reported in the Globe, and Lena did not ask, and if she lay awake one night thinking about the purple amethyst ring and Matteo's crayon pressing hard into paper, she filed that away in the same cabinet where she kept everything else she'd learned from 3 years of overnight shifts. Some things you know and don't say. What she did say, 5 days later when the number on the back of the card appeared on her phone at 8 in the morning. "Hello?" "It's Caruso." A pause. "Matteo wants to see you. He's communicated this fairly insistently over the last 4 days. Another pause, slightly less controlled than the first. "He drew a picture of your hospital badge and taped it to the refrigerator." Lena sat down on the edge of her bed. "Okay," she said. "I'd like to discuss terms. A proper arrangement, not whatever this has been." The briskness in his voice was doing something complicated. She was learning to read the spaces between his sentences. "You clearly have a rapport with my son that his 3 previous therapists and 2 nannies did not achieve. I would like to compensate you appropriately for continued." "I'm not a therapist," Lena said. "I know what you are," he said it simply. "I know what you're working with, financially, Miss Pruitt. I looked into your situation. Lena felt her spine stiffen. Did you? Your brother's physical therapy, your rent, your student loans from the nursing program, a beat. I'm trying to make an argument. What argument? That you deserve better than vending machine crackers and a break room with a broken coffee machine. A very slight pause. I had that last part confirmed independently. Lena pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a noise. When she trusted herself, what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Caruso? That you come and work for me. For Matteo, specifically. You'd be compensated properly. I think it will address your objections, and you'd have full days, not night shifts. Your brother's PT would be covered entirely. Your landlord situation will resolve itself by end of week. Lena stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Boston was doing what it did in April, half-heartedly trying to become spring. And if I say no, then I thank you for what you've done and I don't call again. A pause, but Matteo taped the picture of your badge to the refrigerator. The weight of that settled somewhere in the center of Lena's chest. I'll need a contract, she said. In writing. My own lawyer reviews it. Of course. And I want to understand exactly what your organization does, Mr. Caruso. I'm not asking for everything. I'm asking for enough to know what I'm walking into. Silence, then. That's a reasonable request. And I want Matteo to have an actual therapist. Not, instead of me, in addition to agreed. And I want to keep my job at Mercy General. Part-time. 2 shifts a week. A longer pause. Why? Because I worked for 3 years to get there, and I'm not trading it for a situation that might change. She watched a delivery truck struggle through a pothole on Dorchester Ave. I'm not trying to be difficult, Mr. Caruso. I'm trying to be smart. The silence that followed was a different kind. When he spoke again, something in his voice had shifted very slightly, the way a note changes when you play it in a different key. I'll have the contract drawn up today, he said. The house was nothing like the hospital. The hospital was fluorescent and efficient and smelled of disinfectant and old carpet. The Caruso residence in Beacon Hill was 4 stories of federal-style brick and an overwhelming silence that was nothing like the diner. Nothing like any building Lena had been in before. It was the silence of a place that had once been louder and was still getting used to itself. Matteo met her in the foyer. He was wearing his sneakers on the correct feet for the first time she'd seen, and he had a rolled-up paper in his fist. He unrolled it and held it up. It was a drawing of a hospital, her green scrubs, and next to the small stick figure with yellow hair, a large stick figure with dark hair in a suit, and a small stick figure between them. All 3 holding hands, a sun overhead, a family. Lena looked at the drawing. She looked at the boy who had sat week after week in a plastic chair and said nothing and everything at once. Can I keep this one too? She asked. He gave her a look of exasperated patience that was so purely 7-year-old that she almost laughed. He'd been holding it out to her since she walked in. Of course you can keep it. That's why I made it. She took it carefully and folded it over the one she still carried in her pocket, the one with the sun from their very first week. She pressed them both flat against her sternum. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Franklin Caruso came down in a suit, but without the jacket, his collar open, which she was learning meant it was a working-from-home day. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her the way he had in the waiting room that first night, like he was still working out the vocabulary. He's been up since 5, he said. He set out the chair for you himself. Lena looked into the sitting room, where, indeed, a chair had been positioned at a very deliberate angle to the window. There was a cup on the side table. Matteo, who had followed her gaze, now looked at his father, then at Lena, and pointed firmly at the chair. She sat. The weeks that followed were not simple. Lena was not naive enough to believe that cleaning up a situation like this was a matter of one bad actor removed and everything else settling. She had moved into the guest suite in the East Wing at Franklin Caruso's insistence, and her own reluctant acknowledgement that the commute would otherwise be unsustainable. She had kept her 2 shifts at Mercy General. She had met the organization's lawyer and her own, and read every line of the contract that she subsequently signed. She had also, slowly and inevitably, begun to understand what it meant to live inside a house that was rebuilding itself. She understood it in the way Franklin Caruso knocked on Matteo's door before opening it, always, and the way Matteo had begun to appear in the kitchen in the mornings at the same time his father made coffee, orbiting him without saying so. She understood it in the new therapist, a small, calm woman named Dr. Okafor who had worked with traumatized children for 20 years, and in the way Matteo came out of their Thursday sessions and sometimes looked lighter and sometimes looked like he'd been turned inside out, and both were progress. She understood it on a Thursday afternoon in May when she found a folded piece of paper slipped under her door. It was a drawing, careful, detailed, the most intricate thing she'd seen from Matteo. The foyer of the house, rendered in brown and black crayon. The stairs, 3 figures at the bottom. Matteo had put sun coming through the front window. He had labeled each figure, printing slowly and seriously, in the letters he was just now beginning to trust. Lena, Matteo. Underneath, home. Lena sat on the floor of the East Wing guest suite that was becoming less guest-like by the day and held the drawing for a long time. She understood it also on a Sunday evening in June, in the kitchen, when Franklin Caruso set a cup of coffee next to her without being asked and said, "Danny's last PT appointment is this Thursday. Dr. Reeves says he should be at full mobility by fall." Lena looked at the cup. She thought about 3 years of vending machine coffee and second notices and keeping her mouth shut and her head down. "Thank you," she said. "Thank your brother," Franklin Caruso said. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with that same directness, the one she had first read as cold and now understood as something else entirely, the expression of a man who had spent a long time inside his own controlled silences and was slowly, carefully, beginning to say more. "I was thinking," he said, "that if your 2 shifts at Mercy General are on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, you might." He stopped, rerouted, tried again. Matteo would like to continue going to the hospital waiting area. "Not for any clinical reason. He wants to visit," Lena said. "Yes, on my shifts, if that's not an imposition." Lena thought about a 7-year-old who had sat in a plastic chair for 9 weeks and eaten crackers from his coat pocket because he was waiting, with absolute and total faith, for the right person to notice him. "It's not an imposition," she said. Franklin Caruso nodded. He picked up his own coffee and turned to look out the kitchen window at the small courtyard, where Matteo was currently trying to build something ambitious out of sticks and a collection of rocks he'd been curating since April. "He asked me something yesterday," he said. Lena waited. "He asked if you were going to stay." The words were careful, even. The same precision he applied to the drawings, to the edge of a table, to everything he was trying not to drop. "I told him that wasn't a question I could answer for you." The kitchen was very quiet. "What did he say to that?" Lena asked. Franklin Caruso turned from the window. The corner of his mouth shifted. He went and got a piece of paper. Matteo Caruso spoke his first full sentence on a Wednesday morning in August. 8 months after the night at Mercy General, standing in the kitchen in his pajamas with his sneakers already on the right feet and a drawing in his fist that he had apparently finished at some point during the night. He looked at his father. He looked at Lena. He held up the drawing. It was the 3 of them again. The same 3 figures he'd been drawing in different variations for months. The tall one, the yellow-haired one, the small one between them. But this drawing had something none of the others had. In the sky above them, Matteo had drawn a constellation. 7 stars connected by careful lines, said, because she'd taught him the constellation 2 weeks ago on the rooftop. Matteo gave her the exasperated patience look. He turned the drawing around and pointed to the bottom, where he had written, in his slow, deliberate letters. Then he looked up at his father. "I want her to stay," Matteo said. His voice was rough with sleep and disuse and the sheer effort of words, but it was clear and it was certain. "She has to stay." "Okay, Dad?" Franklin Caruso looked at his son. He looked at Lena. There was nothing calculated in his expression now. No control, no cataloging. Just a man standing in a kitchen in the early Boston morning with his heart entirely on his face. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Okay." Lena looked at the drawing. She looked at the 7 stars above the 3 stick figures. She thought about the first granola bar, the first cup of apple juice, the first drawing of a sun. She thought about 9 weeks in a plastic chair and a little boy who had been trying to tell someone something for 14 months and had finally, in the most patient and circuitous way imaginable, found exactly the right ears. She took the drawing from Matteo and tucked it against her chest, next to the others. Some people come into your life through the front door with their name announced, and some find you in a waiting room at 9 at night, with their sneakers on the wrong feet, eating crackers from their pocket, waiting for someone to sit down. When they find you, you stay.